Hello and welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This is episode 197. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike.
Last week, we had a really successful episode. I want to give a couple of thanks. First of all, to guitarist-composer Brent Laidler, and also Tactus Records over in Italy for sharing our episode on Facebook. So be sure to check out Brent's Hidden Gems recording, and also Paolo Dal Moro and Maurizio Fornero's recording of Luigi Hughes's flute compositions on Tactus Records if you haven't heard them yet.
Oh yeah, thanks a lot to Tactus Records for posting our episode. Incidentally, I just want to say, aren't all of our episodes really successful in the end? Because we do complete them and upload them. To me, that's successful.
It's successful, sure. We just hope that we can share it with as many people as possible.
Yeah, that would be nice too.
And we've got a bang-up program of interesting music in this episode as well. We don't really have any other good or bad news to report, so I think we'll just jump right into things here.
Yep, no news is good news.
That's right. Other than there's a whole lot of new music that's coming out in January, so I feel spoiled for choice for picking things for upcoming episodes.
Yeah, by the way, as seems to be the trend in classical music, a lot of the really good recordings that I've been seeing are all double albums and like 2 hours long. Oh, wow. And we're not quite in a position to do those on the podcast. I mean, we might do one or two of them. There's a new Theatine Langlois de Swart recording of the Four Seasons. It has other things on it too. So that's a 2 CD album. We may do that, but we have a little bit more free time in the coming months. So.
Right. Yeah, we'll have to get those done in the springtime here, I think, before things get too busy. Anyway, as always, in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the recordings that we're going to talk about in this episode. Also, at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. If you can't see the full description or the recording list and links are hard to follow on whatever app you listen to us on, you can always come over and check us out on our host site, Podbean, podbean.com, where everything is easy to follow. If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations, and that helps us grow our audience as well. Come over and follow us on our Facebook page to get extra info and more new release information. You can catch up on new music ahead of time as we do. You can leave a message or comment there, see our interaction with the artists, and you can follow us over on X now as well. I post the episodes there when we get them published, and our ID over there is Adult Music Pod. If you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, at gmail.com. We're going to play music samples of these recordings as we discuss them, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. And all that being said, we're going to start out with some harpsichord music tonight. Mike?
Yes, we are. And this is an artist that I liked a lot back in the day, and we don't hear from her too often anymore. Harpsichord music from the reign of Louis XIV. People may remember from history the Sun King, Louis XIV, the King of France. He kind of lived at Versailles back in the day. And this is by Sophie Yates on the harpsichord, British harpsichordist, on the Chandos Chacon label, and released on January 10th. Now, Sophie Yates, I remember her. She began her career by winning the International Erwin Bodke competition at the Boston Early Music Festival, and there's no year mentioned, but it had to be the early 1990s because that's when her albums started coming out. It says also the competition is held periodically. It's very mysterious.
That's strange,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think they just say, hey, let's have an Erwin Bodke competition this year. I guess they just have one. That's the way it makes it seem. I don't know what's going on. I did a search on the internet. I couldn't find out they don't have a web page. I couldn't find any information about it. Anyway, let me ask you this. Who's worse documented, would you say, classical artists or jazz artists, as far as the internet is concerned? They're both up there, I have to tell you.
It's hit and miss, really, depending on the record labels, yeah.
I guess. Yeah, classical artists, it's just hard to find information about their backgrounds that isn't like, he played at all these amazing halls and,
right.
Is admired around the world,
I'd say a lot of jazz artists have to do their own promotion.
Right.
And so the ones who have their own home pages or social media work hard to make themselves known.
Anyway, Sophie Yates is interested in historic instruments and especially surviving virginals from the UK, and she's made a few recordings on those as well. Now, Sophie Yates wrote the program notes herself on this album. She says the music on this recording is likely to have been heard in the intimacy of the private apartments at the Palace of Versailles rather than the grand salons, and therefore she recorded the music in the large domestic setting of an English manor house of the same period. Oh, I just want to mention, Sophie Yates' heyday, really, when she was very young, was in the 1990s, and she did all these wonderful sort of mixed composer recordings that were grouped according to country. So there's an Italian one, a German one, a French one, and they're just fantastic. It was a great way for me back in the day to learn, the kind of character of different harpsichord music from the Baroque era. So
right.
I still have those albums and listen to them quite often. So if Sophie Yates, if you're listening, thanks for those. Anyway, so in the note, she states that Jacques Champion de Chambonnière is a pivotal composer to this particular program, even though we don't hear much of him on it. His importance as founder of the French harpsichord style is hard to overstate, and his influence flows through the work of his students, who are also represented on the album. They are Louis Couperin, Jean-Henri d'Anglebert, and Nicolas Lebec, and we hear a lot of their music on this album. Yates plays a double manual harpsichord with 4.5 octaves made by Andrew Garlick. Yeah, she was playing these back in the 90s too, so they're still the same instrument. And it's a copy of the Varduhi family's harpsichord, Paris, in 1681, and it's in the collection of Victoria and Albert Museum in London. The original one, not this copy that she's playing. Now, a double manual harpsichord means it has 2 keyboards on it, and one of them is going to be sort of a big fuller sound, and another one's going to be is going to strike only like a single string in the instrument, so it'll be a quieter sound. And we're going to hear a lot of sort of going back and forth between the manuals on this album. It's a technique that she seems to like a lot. I have a complaint about the book's layout. First of all, there are 22 tracks on the album, and the track listing is spread out over 4 pages of the CD booklet and written in tiny print. You could have done this in 2 pages, Chandos, so there's a lot of space, and I don't know, I feel like I didn't need to be skipping through all those pages to see what I was listening to. I guess they wanted to give the suites their own pages or something like that, so we didn't get all confused. Anyway, that's just my humble opinion to be discarded at will if you prefer.
I did read her notes, and I found them quite informative, though.
Yeah, I did too, and I thought she's a good writer as well on music. Yes. She's very direct and simple and interesting as well, so I was kind of happy to see that. Okay, tracks 1 through 7, Jean-Henri d'Anglebert, Troisième Suite in D minor. I'm just going to say the D minor part in English, which I think is Ré mineur in French. Track 1 is a prelude, so this is a suite, and it'll be made up of Baroque era dances. We probably know the Bach suites. This is much like those. It starts with a prelude. Now, whenever we have a prelude in Baroque times, it's generally an improvised sounding piece. It's written down, but it's usually sort of exploratory in the harmony, and it's got to sound like it's being improvised. This one's also unmeasured, so it doesn't have bar lines or a beat, so it's just going to be sort of drifting around as far as there's no meter. And the movement draws on the practice of lutenists who improvised around their tuning, creating an opening gesture while preparing the instrument, preparing the listener as well for the pieces that followed. And I got to say, it's a shame this isn't done today. Instead of just tuning your instrument and like having everybody just kind of be bored, why don't you just kind of start picking out something while you're tuning? That could be really cool. The instrument is admirably placed at a bit of a distance from the microphone, yet it's still louder than it would be in concert. Although, maybe not, okay? Maybe I just had it turned up loud, because the bottom manual of this probably is pretty loud.
It's pretty full sounding on the recording.
Right. It gets what I'd call a traditional harpsichord sound, what we think of when we think of the harpsichord, because we've heard Lurch playing the Addams Family theme. It's that sound. That's the one I think about as the traditional sound, and this instrument gets that for the most part. This piece is very improvisatory in nature, as the notes suggest, Yates brings out some tuneful lines in the floating rhythm. The movement is fairly long for a prelude at just over 4 minutes. I like the lighter sound she employs at around the 2-minute mark. This is when she switches to the upper manual, which only plays one string. So let's sample there. Yeah, very pretty and even style. Sophie Yates is a very straightforward player, and I've always admired that about her. She subtly changes the sound for different sections, basically using the 2 manuals and making the unmeasured work more digestible, more followable, let's say. The second movement, Allemande, has a light sound and rhythm, and the instrument gently chimes here. I've always liked Yates' straightforward approach to the instrument, and we get that here. Good melodic shaping, nothing precious about the tone. There are some surprisingly deep-sounding harmonies in the lower register of the instrument, especially at around the 2nd minute. I like her straightforward way with chord rolls and appoggiaturas. Track 3, Courante et double. Now, there's a slight start and stop quality to the theme here. It's a little unusual, so of course it caught my ear. Let's see if it catches yours. Heading to that cadence, which is probably still about 10 seconds away. Yates appealingly changes the sound to a thinner tone for the repeat of the opening. That sort of hiccuping start and stop quality leads to the occasional odd harmony, appealing to the ear. One of my favorite things about music from this era, that sort of odd note that isn't in the key, that just kind of acts as a passing note or sometimes just some kind of color, I guess. Track 4, Deuxième Courante, that's the second courante. This one also doesn't move in a perpetual motion rhythm, but has a light release to its rhythm. Again, Yates alters the tone of the instrument for certain thematic and section changes. Track 5, Sarabande grave, or I guess it would be in French, grave. The first of 2 sarabands in this suite. Yates plays this with a rather heavy tread to it. It's on the fast side for a sarabande, having a continuing quality to it. There's a dark and dramatic quality to the piece. Track 6 is a sarabande also, and this one has a lighter tone to it, played higher up on the keyboard. It's still got the gravity we expect from a sarabande. It's a slow, kind of more serious dance. They say it's passionate as well. I think its origins are Spanish. It's very well paced here too, so let's hear a bit of this. Some interesting delays of that cadence right there towards the end. For the repeat, the bass line disappears and Yates makes it more stark by changing the timbre, giving the instrument a bit more of a nasal quality. And track 7 is a gigue. This has a full harpsichord sound in this joyful dance. I like the swaying motion of the rhythm in the second and final section, which begins at the 1 minute and 40-second mark. So let's sample it there. That's how the piece ends. Next, we get a suite by various composers called Suite de pièces de clavecin, and from M.S. Drouant and M.S. Bauin, I guess you would say that. Now, M.S. means manuscrit or manuscript. Okay, this needs a little explanation. The two manuscripts, Drouant and Bauin, I don't know how to say that, Bauyn, are two important 17th century sources for harpsichord compositions. They contain works by composers from France, Germany, and Italy. In the manuscripts, pieces were grouped together by key, and dances were grouped by form. So that means that all of the Allemands were published together, one after the other, and then when they were all published, then the Courants would come, and you'd see all of those, and it would go on. So it was up to the harpsichordist to put a suite together in the traditional order of dances included in the suite. So it's sort of like a Sears catalog where you're looking at, the women's clothing section, and you can pick something from that, and then maybe you'll match it in the next section with pants or something. Players chose not by composer, but by the various examples of each genre to create a suite. So these were usually put together of works by different composers, and that's what we have here. Most of the works are by Jacques Champion de Chambonnières, the big influence behind this album. And I guess these works would have been danced to at court, or at least in these smaller rooms that they were in, because they sound very dancey. Track 8, Allemand de Monsieur Lebègue, and this is by Nicolas Lebègue from manuscript Drouant. It's a straightforward Allemand, very pretty, and some expressive appoggiatures added by Yates. I like her evenness of approach with the rhythm. I use that a lot with her. She's very even-toned. Yeah, she'll do some slight retards for effect, but generally she'll just keep that rhythm moving. There are slight pauses just before chords, very expressive. The piece has a nice change to a brief triplet dotted rhythm at 1 minute and 23 seconds. The B section of this ABP seems to move the melody into the higher range for the most part, giving the piece a yearning quality. Track 9, Courant by Jacques Champion de Chambonnières from manuscript Bauin. I wish I knew how to say that. Anyway, I like the fullness of the chords at the beginning of this dancing piece, so let's sample that. Tricky avoidance of the cadence there. I guess I'm going to have to get out of that. This comes across with a bit of boldness, and Yates keeps the downbeat strong throughout, as you heard. Track 10, Sarabande de Monsieur de Chambonnières, second Sarabande du même auteur, and this is by Jacques Champion de Chambonnières from the manuscript Bauin. Yates starts with a thinner, probably single string tone on this Sarabande. It gives the piece a sort of hush, like you're hearing a secret. I rather liked the tone. Let's hear it. It works well in this piece. Reaching up there. At 1 minute and 40 seconds, Yates changes the tone to something fuller for the next section with a quick switch to the thinner sound for one final statement of the theme at the end. It's a nice interpretation. Track 11, Gigue de même auteur. So that's Jacques Champion de Chambonnières from the manuscript Bauin. This gigue has a dotted triplet feel to it at the beginning and some attractive melodic material as it goes on, particularly in the B section, I thought. Track 12, Chacon de Monsieur de Chambonnières, second Chacon. And this is by Chambonnière, again from the manuscript Drouant. Chacon's are generally long, but this one is under 3 minutes and starts with a repeating pattern in the lower end of the harpsichord. At around 45 seconds, the first theme to be played over the repeating material comes in. The range of the piano that the varied right-hand material is played in changes with each theme, making this a bit of harpsichord ear candy. And track 13, Danse Angloise, an anonymous composer from the manuscript Drouant. This has a cheerful melody and rhythm to it. It's pretty simple. What's not to like? Let's hear it, because we're going to hear some more, some sadder music coming up. So let's just get something a little cheerful in our ear. No, you get the idea. It's a very short piece. I don't want to play the entire thing. Anyway, track 14, Louis Couperin, Tombeau, de Monsieur Blanc-Rocher, from manuscript Bowing. Now, a tombeau is really a memorial for someone who died, so they're usually pretty slow and lugubrious, as this one is. This one, in fact, is a heartfelt homage to the lutenist Charles Fleury, Sieur de Blanc-Rocher, one of the leading lute players of the day. He fell down a flight of stairs to his sudden death. Does that still happen? I guess people still fall down the stairs and die. I don't know. He died in 1652 in the arms of Johann Jakob Froberger, who also wrote a tombeau in his memory. The tolling of bells can be heard in this piece, and it starts hesitantly with an upward arpeggio that pauses, like it doesn't really want to go on. Maybe it's just too emotionally overwrought to continue. It has a sense of wandering from chord to chord at its slow tempo, the listener not sure what the next harmony is going to be. Not sure how it's going to go on without Monsieur Fleury in their life. And that makes this interesting. There's a bit of momentum gained in the first minute and arrivals at some odd harmonies. I'll try to get one in, as well as a brief imitation of the tolling bells, so I'm going to start this from 1 minute and 50 seconds. Yeah, so that brief repeating pattern would be the tolling bells. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the piece, the next section begins in a higher range. We hear the bell sounds again. This piece, being a tombeau, is naturally on the ponderous side, with a slow tempo and more minor harmonies. Yates switches to that quieter, thinner-toned timbre for the last bars of the piece. It's rather a surprise. Track 15, Nicolas Lebègue, Les Cloches, or The Bells, from manuscript Calment in 1707. This is a completely different manuscript than any of the ones we've talked about so far. This is a premiere recording of this work, which was found in a recently discovered manuscript, Le Manuscrit Calment Clavecin, which is now housed in a private collection. It contains 151 pieces, most of which are unknown elsewhere. It's one of the two volumes. One is for harpsichord music, the other for organ music. Lebègue was one of the organistes du roi. This bell piece was programmed as a suitable follow-up in the bells heard in Couperin's previous piece. Let's hear a little bit of that. I'm a big fan of bell sounds on keyboard instruments, so I'm going to play this one too. All right, really pretty. I really like that. Here the cascading bell sounds start right away. Yates plays them gently with a slow tempo, allowing her to clearly articulate each note in the line. The bell sounds come in more quickly in the last bars of this attractive piece. Track 16, Jean-Baptiste Lully, Chacon d'Amadis, from manuscript Calment, 1707. This is from Lully's Amadis, Tragédie and Musique, a longish piece with a pretty rolled chord opening. It's got a light dancing rhythm to it, and one could imagine dancers of the day presenting a scene at court to this. Yates again separates call and response sections by moving between keyboard manuals from a fuller to a lighter sound and back. It's always an appealing approach. I guess if I were alive at the time, I would have wanted a double manual keyboard because I kind of would like to go back and forth myself. The piece, as we'd expect from a chaconne, plays with a set of variations, and it's pretty creative throughout and very appealing. Let's hear a little bit of this. I'm going to go to the 4-minute and 30-second mark of this fairly long piece. Okay, we got to hear a little bit of that switching of keyboard manuals in that sample as well. Track 17, Louis Couperin, Prélude à l'imitation de Monsieur Froberger, from manuscript Bauhin. This is an Italianate work. Froberger settled in France and was another student of Chambonnière. It starts with an improvisatory searching opening, as preludes on the period often did. After about a minute, Yates again changes manuals for a lighter sound. She times these changes well so that they give you a bit of a surprise when they happen. At 2 minutes and 53 seconds, the introduction ends and a dancing theme reminiscent of an Italian harpsichord work begins. Yates gives this a lively rhythm. Let's hear a little bit of it from about the 2-minute and 53-second mark. Very nice. I should mention, that sounded like the beginning of the piece, but there was a long introduction before that ended, and that was the main section. At 4 minutes and 16 seconds, this dancing section ends, and we come to another ponderous improvisatory section, but in a darker, more minor mode, and this brings the piece to its eventual melancholy end. Track 18, Louis Couperin, Pavane, from manuscript Bauhin, in F-sharp minor. This may be a tombeau to a lute player, this time for Ennemond Galtier, who was court lutenist in Paris during the time of Marie de Medici. Yates mentions in her note that F-sharp minor was known as the ton de la chèvre, or key of the goat, but she doesn't tell us why. I tried looking on the internet for information and just got a lot of music theory pages, so I relented and went to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT told me that F-sharp minor on a keyboard could produce a certain harsh or dissonant sound due to the abundance of sharps in the key signature. Now, if you're going to do that on a piano, you're not going to hear that. But I think, in this case, you have to keep in mind that there was no equal temperament in the Baroque era, which is what we have today on a piano.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the further away you got from C major, if you had a lot of sharps and flats in the key, they'd be a little, slightly out of tune. The steps wouldn't be even. So as he got away from C major, the key would sound more and more out of tune. The sound, like a goat, would be unpredictable, is what that means. It was often used by Gautier and the lutenists of the period, whose expressive playing served as an example to all the contemporary harpsichordists. Now, if you were tuning like a guitar or a lute, you didn't have equal temperament necessarily, but you could kind of bend notes and sort of lean into, I guess, certain tones. I'm not really sure how that works on a lute. Anyway, this is a slow, mournful piece right from the beginning. The movement of the harmony comes across as exploratory, wandering from chord to chord, and landing unexpectedly on certain harmonies. At 2 minutes and 42 seconds, Yates changes to the lighter-sounding manual, a trick, as I've said, that's always appealing, but by track 18 we've been hearing it often on the album. I still like the effect, though, but the piece remains dark and heavy throughout. By the way, before I go on to the next track, I want to mention, I would like to hear someone take a risk and record an album that's completely on the harpsichord, tuned in just intonation. For example, you'd tune everything to like that C major so that all those harmonies are as they should sound. And then as the piece goes into like the other keys, it sounds odder and odder because you get the sense that you're getting further and further away from the home key. And that's the effect you're supposed to have. So you're in a strange place where things sound a little weird. It would be cool because that's the way people heard music back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hear everything is equal now. It's all the keys are kind of on the same level, really, as far as like the spacing between them goes. Tracks 19 through 22, Gaspard Leroux, a cinquième suite in F major, published in 1705. This is lighter in style than the preceding pieces, and it gives us a happy send-off. This is the last work on the album. It was kind of a relief after the preceding 3 tracks were pretty heavy going harmonically and tempo-wise. So track 19 is a prelude. It's very short and improvisatory, clocking in at just over a minute. It's got a few surprising harmonic turns in its brief time span. Track 20, Allemande grave. It's marked grave, but it's not as heavy as that marking might indicate. Check for yourself. The word grave kind of makes me think of it really means serious, but it sort of gives me the sense that there's something heavy about the piece. And this one, yeah, it's serious, but I don't get that heavy sense from it. Anyway, there's a pretty cool sudden shift to the minor at 1 minute and 30 seconds. Maybe that's the grave part, after which the B section of the structure starts. And for the repeat at 2 minutes and 45 seconds, one of Yates' characteristic changes of manual to the lighter timbre. Track 21, a courante, which is a lively dance here, sounding a bit Italian in its sprung rhythm, and it's over pretty quickly. And track 22, the final movement, chaconne. This starts lower in the harpsichord's range, with all of the harmony blending as a mass, and the theme not standing out much. For the first variation, the right hand leaps into a higher register for a brighter, highly ornamented sound. We get a manual change to a lighter sound. Yates really likes going from heavy to light, so up to the higher manual. That's the next variation, and then she goes back to the lower manual for a dotted rhythm variation. There are quite a few of these changes in this piece to highlight the changing right-hand material. Toward the end, there are more virtuosic scale runs, leading to a slight decelerando to the final chord. And that's the album. I liked the program and the idea behind it, which is an assortment of the types of music you could expect to hear at a 17th century French court. They're not all the same. There's a lot of variety here. Louis XIV was a lover of music, and because of this he had musicians in his retinue who left behind a lot of interesting music. The variety of types of music on this album is impressive, from the dancing to the lugubrious and mournful. Sophie Yates somehow makes her love of playing and of this music audible on the recording. This is one of the qualities that drew me to her playing back in the 1990s and still draws me to her now. I always get a lot of pleasure listening to her. She's more straightforward in approach than some of the harpsichordists we've featured on adult music, and certainly no less appealing for that. She gives the music a sense of elegance and poise, certainly in tune with its time and the place it was written for.
I thought it's an enjoyable program that invites reflection, and it made me imagine the type of setting that it would have been performed in. There's a lot of variety in the style of compositions, as you mentioned. Some have more decoration, and others have really interesting independent bass line movement that I enjoyed following along with as well. Overall, there's a lot of sparseness in these works that brings clarity of line, which matches her straightforward way of playing, I thought. And even the mostly dance piece program is presented very unhurriedly by Yates, as I would imagine it being performed in a kind of secluded entertainment space. The tone of the harpsichord is charming with ringing tone and that full lower register, and you get those two different shifts often in the program between the parts of the harpsichord instrument. I found it kind of charming, tonally overall, enjoyable recording.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of clarity of line, so
yeah.
The late Renaissance to the late classical eras are really great for that. Speaking of clarity of line, Beethoven. We're going to hear his Missa Solemnis. This is a rarely recorded work, although it's really famous, and I guess it requires big forces, so you don't hear it too often. I think people would rather record the Ninth Symphony, which was composed at about the same time. This recording features the soloists Chen Reiss on soprano, Varduhi Abrahamyan, mezzo-soprano, Daniel Behle, tenor, and Tareq Nazmi, bass. Also the Audi Jugendchorakademie, Le Cercle de l'Harmonie, conducted by Jérémie Rhorer. And this is on the Alpha label, released January 10th, 2025. So the conductor, Jérémie Rhorer, says his interpretation pays close attention to the question of tempi. And it certainly does, I have to say, after hearing this. These tempi have become progressively slower and heavier since the post-Romantic period. Now, I want to mention something about this. Since the period instrument performance has started, the tempi have, in fact, been getting faster. I think John Elliott Gardner's recordings show that. But this is a different kettle of fish altogether that we're going to get on this recording. Rhorer adds that the tempi have a direct bearing on the vocal comfort of the singers, since breath control is one of the great difficulties of this work. The recording features the Audi Jugendchorakademie, a German youth choir. You actually said that wrong the first time. This time I said it right. A German youth choir founded in 2007. Le Cercle de l'Harmonie is Rhorer's period instrument orchestra. They will soon be celebrating their 20th anniversary. The Missa Solemnis is more like an oratorio than music intended for a Catholic ceremony. Part of its inspiration was Handel's Messiah. It transforms the Mass into a drama of the soul. The work draws inspiration from many genres, including the symphony for large orchestra and the dramatic writing employed in opera. And in fact, this is really the seminal work for a lot of later masses that are going to be written, for example, like Verdi's Requiem, which is a Requiem Mass, and just like heavier, more dramatic works like that. Anyway, this is a very different performance of this work than I've ever heard before. It starts out with the Kyrie, and I already, right at the beginning, like the lighter tone of the period instrument orchestra. This is lighter even than Gardner's performances. And those old brass instruments have a lot of character. The Kyries are interesting. Generally, the choir lets go of the word, and there's only a soloist singing the syllable, so he's sort of like exposed when the choir stops singing. That happens here, but it's a bit more transparent. You can hear when the soloist starts if you're kind of listening closely. The lighter sound is appealing. I'm enjoying the fact that the tempo and volume aren't blowing me away as though they were part of a Wagner opera, which often happens in performances of this work. The tone is rather solemn, as the title of the Mass suggests. I really love the interweaving voices of the Christe Eleison section, and I think that would make a good sample, so I'm going to go to that. This is from around the 3 minute and 15 second mark. And the choir starts coming in. We'll hear more of them later. Now, one of the things I liked about that was usually when you're hearing this, even though the voices are interweaving, you're usually paying most attention to the higher voices, especially people like me who grew up listening to rock music. You're listening to the melody, and you don't really hear the lower voices as well. But in this case, it's actually easy to hear all of the voices because of the transparency of the playing and the placement of the singers. The men are placed far into the right channel, and the women are more in the left channel. They're kind of easy to hear and to pick out of the texture. Again, the singers aren't trying to blow us away here either, and the music emerges with a lot of solemn character. In keeping with the title of the Mass, Missa Solemnis, Solemn Mass. The opening Kyrie section repeats as the A section of an ABA form. The movement is conducted with considerable sensitivity, a quality we don't hear enough of in this work. The ending is especially gently taken. So I really liked this. Track 2, part 1 of the Gloria. This has an aggressive opening, and the period timpani make it explode out of the gate and the speakers. With a lot of power, but not with a lot of like chest cavity force. It's definitely very much a sound. Let's hear it. Now, if you're hearing that thinking, are they singing Freude schöne Götterfunken from the Ninth Symphony? They're not, but you're not completely wrong. Beethoven used this material that we just heard in the Ninth Symphony as well. He was writing both works at the same time and often used the same material to different effects in works. He does this in some of his cello sonatas and other works as well. So the Ninth Symphony is just so famous that you just think of it right away when you hear this. So yeah, that material is familiar to our ears if we know the Ninth Symphony well. The Et Intera line is taken tranquilly, pianissimo. There's a lot of dynamic contrast in this section, with the pianissimi registering beautifully with profound quiet. Gratias agimus tibi has the soloists interweaving as in the Christe of the previous movement. The Miserere nobis positively sails by in a gliding, quick tempo. And that's going to be a bit of surprise for people who have heard this work on other recordings. It's pretty quick and very appealing. Track 3, the second part of the Gloria here, the Qui tollis peccata mundi, who takes away the sins of the world. So the wind section starts this part. The soloists again interweave with the text, the choir coming in occasionally to fill the sound and vocal lines out. There's a bit of the Side und Stunden Millionen section to the Ninth Symphony in this section. Let's hear the entry of the Qui sedes line in the choir, with percussion accenting the entry. So it also hints of the Ninth Symphony in there as well. The music quiets at the end, leading to the next section, the Quoniam. This is track 4. The music quickly crescendos for this line of the text, sung loudly by the choir. There's a fugue in the next section between women's and men's voices. The timpani and strings get a rolling dramatic section going for the In Gloria Dei Patris. The Amen for the soloist is taken at a pretty quick pace. The tessitura for the soloist is often high, and they're getting quite a workout in this piece. Rhorer claims that the quicker tempos help them, and I have to say the pacing sounds natural to my ear. It's quick. It's quicker than we're used to in this, but it really does sound very natural. So give that a listen too. Track 5, the Credo. This is part 1, Credo in Unum Deum. I like the entry of the period strings in this movement. Listen again to the overall timbre. This particular period instrument ensemble gets a really unique sound. This is a mighty section of the work, the volume's high, and there's a lot of booming from the percussion. The drama comes across well. Track 6, part of the Credo, Et Incarnatus Est, and he was made man. This is given a quiet, rapt, sacred-sounding sound. Let's come in for the soloist singing the word Maria. I like the fluttering flute played above them, as though it's the Holy Spirit fluttering nearby. And we heard the choir and a bit of soloing by the tenor there, Daniel Behle. There's a bit of the operatic chorus on Sub Pontio Pilato as well. Track 7, the last part of the Credo, Et Resurrexit. And he was resurrected. Okay, so of course this is going to be a really cheerful section of the work, always sung with energy and joy. That's certainly the case here. The choir captures the energy of the text well, as does the orchestra with Beethoven's music here. Quieter sections later provide contrast, with the soprano's tessitura being pushed up high. Always the case in Beethoven. He really likes the very high soprano sounds. At the 5-minute and 12-second mark, a fugal section begins on Et Expecto Resurrectionem. The movement ends powerfully on the Amen, with brief interweaving lines on the words sung by the soloists. Track 8 is the Sanctus of the Mass. This is the 4th section. The movement begins quietly in the bass with a bassoon opening the line. It spreads into strings and brass. Each soloist gets a chance to sing the word sanctus in this, holy. They come together for Dominus Deus Sabaoth. Orchestral textures continually draw the ear due to the way the period instruments blend. It's an unfamiliar but intoxicating sound here. Track 9, also the Sanctus, Preludium into the Benedictus. The orchestral prelude is quiet and solemn in tone. I like the light growl of the low brass in this quiet section. I believe the descending wind line from 1 minute and 30 seconds is supposed to represent the Spirit of Jesus descending to earth to transform the bread into his body, or it could be the Holy Spirit too. But let's listen to that section. And again, towards the end of that sample, you heard a few brass chords, and I really liked the timbre there. It was a little different than what we're used to. The violin gets a long, lightly taken solo in this section. The solo vocalists finally emerge, and we hear bassist Tareq Nazmi and mezzo Varduhi Abrahamyan duet here. Then tenor Daniel Behle and soprano Chen Reiss take over. The text in this section is brief. It's mostly instrumental, though. Track 10, the last section of the Mass, the Agnus Dei. Part 1, the booklet notes state that in the first bars, one can hear, quote, the idea of the misery of humanity without God, as stated by Blaise Pascal, unquote. This is resolved by the appearance of a fragile piece at the end of the work, which we'll hear on the next track. It is a prelude to a final ascent and a symbol of hope reborn. So this work is pretty symbolic. Ninth Symphony textures are back for Pleni sunt Celi, full are the heavens, where heaven and earth are full of your glory. I hadn't noticed that there were so many similar lines in both works before hearing this recording. Let's hear the opening. I like that low note that Tareq Nazmi reaches at the end there. Mezzo Varduhi Abrahamyan and tenor Daniel Behle duet when Nazmi finishes his section, and then soprano Chen Reiss comes in with the rest of the soloists. The choir comes in to begin the next section, and that's track 11, the fifth part of the Mass Agnus Dei, Dona nobis pacem, grant us peace. Here the harmonic weight is lifted as lighter, rising, melismatic textures take over in the choir. The return of the Agnus Dei takes on an operatic tone at 2 minutes and 20 seconds in the solo voices. The upbeat kick to the rhythm remains to the end. Rhoerer's tempo helps to lift this movement and especially its triumphant ending. Well, this is not your run-of-the-mill Missa Solemnis. It's played here with smaller forces, and that leads to a welcome transparency of sound. The mood isn't heroic, as it so often is. People often associate Beethoven with the heroic, but that was only really one part of his pretty big output, his middle period, shall we say. But this is more solemn, in keeping with the title. I found the sound of the album to be comforting, yet still highly dramatic when it needed to be. It'll certainly draw your attention for its unique sound and quick tempi at certain places. All of the soloists sing admirably, but I particularly enjoyed the sound of the Audi Jugendchorakademie. They sing with power and with an appropriate churchy tone. All in all, it's an admirable performance, though I can imagine some feathers being ruffled. That always happens with Beethoven whenever you try to sort of present a different approach. I want to mention, though, I'd really like to hear Jérémie Rhorer conduct the Ninth Symphony. I'd be interested to hear what he does with the textures and especially the tempos of that work. I bet it would emerge much like this recording, and that would be as welcome as this recording is.
You know, I don't know this work very well. I think I've only heard it once before, actually. It does seem to channel a lot of Beethoven's ideas of personal faith and also emotion into the form of a mass in a unique way. And reading the notes from the booklet, it seems he had to kind of have it performed on the sly at the beginning because there were sort of conventions about using a mass outside of a church service. I found the performance moving with an excellent balance in the orchestral and vocal parts. As you said, they don't sort of shout out at you. There's a kind of cohesive whole in the performance. The fast tempos in some sections were a bit surprising, but overall I thought they contrast well with the heavier and slower sections, and it comes off kind of as a lean performance, but well balanced. There's a lot of attention to dynamics in the performance as well. I think I'll need to listen several more times to appreciate it fully, but it left a kind of deep impression on me and something I want to go back to.
That's good. Me too. And I'm going to have to pick this up on CD one day.
Definitely.
It's really good. And now we get to our contemporary composer, and this week's lucky winner on the Adult Music Podcast is Tareq Montalbetti. He's French, despite his last name, and born in 1968, and the album is called Orchestral Pictures. This features quite a cast of performers here. We have Emmanuel Pahud on the flute, Orchestre de la Suisse Romande, conducted by Jonathan Nott. We also get the Gürzenich-Orchester Köln, conducted by Duncan Ward, and the Orchestre Philharmonique de Monte-Carlo, conducted by Kazuki Yamada. So you really have three different conductors from three different cultures there. Pretty interesting on these three works. This was released on the Alpha label on January 10th. So I've got three January 10th releases today, too. Pretty amazing. We're squarely in the year 2025. Okay, so the note writer in the booklet was Michele Tosi, and I'm going to quote from his booklet notes heavily. They give a lot of information, and I'd like to encourage listeners to read them for a deeper understanding of what's going on in this music, because it's pretty complicated. In fact, you need multiple listens, to be honest, and I'm doing this after only hearing this album twice. So, I mean, this is going to take, not even just multiple listens, but probably years of digesting this to really get it. Because it turns out that Montalbetti has his own system of scales and compositions and the way they relate to each other, and getting something like this into your ear is going to take some time. From 1996 to 2014, Tareq Montalbetti was the artistic director of the Radio France Philharmonic Orchestra, overseeing their symphonic repertoire and its general functioning as a living organism. That's going to be a key point there, a living organism. I don't think you think of an orchestra as a living organism, but Montalbetti does, and that's kind of important to keep in mind when you listen to his music. During this period, he was also composing, something he did not make public until 2015, when he began to devote himself exclusively to writing music. So he's really the best version of the guy in your band who comes out and says, "Oh, I just wrote this new song," when the songwriting people is somebody else. My wish, he says, is to immerse the listener in the heart of the sound, to open up the perspective of hearing. That sounds like an attractive plan to me. Montalbetti is conscious of the heritage of Debussy and Messiaen, who he calls his very first heroes, and is skilled in the serialism of Pierre Boulez, which we're going to hear a little bit of here too. Boulez is a composer whose teaching courses Montalbetti attended at the Collège de France. He's also fascinated by spectral music, which uses the acoustic properties of sound as a basis for composition. And if you want to hear what that sounds like, seek out the music of Tristan Mouret or Gérard Grissy. I think we may have done a Grisi piece somewhere on this podcast before. Montalbetti says he's searching for a point of convergence between these types of music, a possible synthesis enabling him to blend modality with serialism without excluding the harmonic contours of composers such as Rhorer. Montalbetti, following the example of Messiaen but going beyond the limits of the octave, has devised a system of 18 non-octave modes and scales, or non-octave modes and scales, giving the system the portmanteau name of mode d'échelle, or mode scales. I'll refer you to the booklet note, which you can download from idagio.com for more information on that, because it gets pretty technical. We're interested in the recording and what the music sounds like here, so I'll say that Montalbetti says his 15-year thought process has led to the development of a software tool to aid composition, the software mode scale created at IRCAM in collaboration with Serge Lemouton. Okay, so we're getting into some really intellectual stuff here. All right, and the music does kind of sound like that too. Tosi states that each one of these orchestral pieces unfolds like a great daydream. This is actually a really good comparison. It does have this kind of floaty, kind of endless, non-beginning, non-end quality to it. A journey across interior landscapes. The composer wants the listener to share in that journey. It's a way of approaching the mystery and meaning of our lives, he says, but without any need to put it into words, rather to experience it through the magic of colors and textures in sound. Okay, so if you're an intellectual type, you can go to the notes and find out what the modes and scales are and how they're built. But really, as a listener, all you have to do is just listen to it and experience it. You don't really have to explain this. I have to do that, and here goes.
Good luck.
Anyway, yeah, these are all single movement works, and there are 3 of them. So track 1 is Concerto pour flûte et orchestre, or flute and orchestra, and the title is Memento Vivere. And this features the amazing Emmanuel Pahud on flute. It's good that this is the first piece on the album, because this is probably the one you should hear first. This features the Orchestre de la Suisse Romande with Jonathan Nott conducting. Svetlin Rusev has the violin solo in this piece. So Memento Vivere means remember that you must live. 2 flutes and a horn are positioned at the front of the stage in this piece. I couldn't really tell what they were and who the flute soloist was, so you could work that out for yourself, I guess. This is one of those works that if you hear it in a live performance, you can actually see the performers playing, and that'll help you follow the sound better. The work has 6 linked sections, each bearing a movement title, which we're not given, by the way, in the notes. We actually are given 3 of them. All of the sections together form a structural and narrative framework. Montalbetti says the piece is shaped like a prayer. Its inner journey is punctuated by expressive markings in the score, such as suddenly darker and more impassioned, and that sort of thing. The journey seems to mark the traces of a personal experience. This is according to Michele Tosi. Given the nature of the flute together with the work's outstanding soloist, the piece is a celebration of the breath, the primary positive energy of life, with the soloist and orchestra working along similar lines. The mode scale system ensures the consistency of the melodic and harmonic material and opens up the whole field of hearing, according to the notes. Yeah, what you want to keep in mind here is that there is organization to this, even if you can't really tell what it is. You'll probably get a sense that it's there because the piece is holding together. Tosi frustratingly only gives us the names and descriptions of 3 of the sections. They say there are 6, we only get 3 of them here. Premier souffle, which means first breath, where an eruptive phrase forms part of the shifting sense of temporality that brings about reiterated efforts and renewed breaths. The second section, Memento Mori, where the flute in G nestles in the hollow of the orchestra, where we hear pizzicato, vibrato, sliding between notes, etc. Quarter tones add their own expressive coloring, and the third section that Tosi tells us about is Renaissance, which is a duo linking the trajectory of the flute to that of the solo violin. Okay, that's just the introduction. I haven't started listening to the work yet. Here we go. All right, so what we want to keep in mind here is breathing and the breath. If you do yoga or if you do anything like breathing exercises, maybe you might want to be thinking of your experiences with that when you listen to this piece, and it might help you connect with it a little bit more. The work starts with the solo flute and its breathy tone, with harmonic punctuation from the orchestra. The timbral element of the work is compelling as we've come to expect from French composers, no different with Montalbetti here. Let's hear the opening of this work. Now, I get a sense of this music as sort of drifting by, sort of like clouds in a way. It's air-oriented, and it is about the breath, as we mentioned in the notes. In this section, we're already hearing subtle effects produced by the flute from the first minute, with a tone altered by the breath, shooting the breath into the instrument, making it sound shakuhachi-like at times, and sometimes just blowing without a tone. We just hear a kind of sound. The orchestra comes more to the fore in the second minute, but the flute continues its constantly timbral changing solo. This is very impressive playing by Emmanuel Pahud here. In the fourth minute, we start to hear the orchestral flutes placed at the front of the stage, I think. They're easily distinguishable from the soloist by their more traditional timbre. They're not pushing the instrument the way Pahud is as the soloist. By the end of the fourth minute, Pahud is producing piercing, quick tones in the high end, and I'm wondering if we're in a new section here, unnamed by the booklet notes. There's a section in the sixth minute with an icy, enchanted feel from the orchestra. Already in the seventh minute, it occurs to me that Pahud hasn't stopped playing since the opening bar. We finally hear an orchestral interlude at about the 7-minute and 50-second mark without the soloist. He re-enters with staccato in the 8th minute, and I'm guessing this is the Memento Mori section I mentioned earlier. Let's hear a little bit of the beginning of that section. And I'm going to go ahead to 9 minutes and 55 seconds for this. Again, notice the light, airy quality of the strings providing the backdrop as well. It's pretty interesting. The solo flute gets a bit of distance in its tone by the 12th minute. The sliding between notes on the flute is heard at around the 13-minute and 20-second mark. Some intriguing harmony is heard in the orchestra in the 14th minute. And in the 15th minute, the Renaissance section occurs as we hear the flute intertwining with the violin. I'll try to get both the chords and the violin into this sample. This is from 14 minutes and 40 seconds. Geez, we didn't hear the violin in there. Wondering what I'm talking about. Anyway, the flute blends more into the orchestral texture in this section, or in the section that follows, and reemerges in its high end in the 18th minute. The orchestra in this work sounds huge and floats out all kinds of intriguing sounds. The recording is excellent, but probably could have used more spaciousness so we could pick up more orchestral detail. There's a lot of it. No complaints, though. This comes across exceptionally well. Pahud really hasn't had much time to rest during the trajectory of the piece, and he's playing some pretty wild lines throughout. He goes into the final minute in his high end and reaches up high for the end of the piece. Track 2, Ouverture Philharmonique pour Grand Orchestre. This is performed by the Gürzenich-Orchester Köln in Germany. Duncan Ward is the conductor, and Natalie Chi has the violin solo. Let me read from the booklet notes. This work adds 4 Wagner Tuben, because of their tenderness of sound, to the 6 horns employed in this work. It also features a bugle rather than a second trumpet, quote, because of its expansive timbre, unquote. That's Montalbetti talking there. The percussion section includes many keyboards. The writing is detailed and well matched to the performers, whom the composer knows well. Montalbetti treats the instruments in family groups, strings, woodwind, brass, harp, keyboards, and percussion, in the spirit of a concerto for orchestra, leading them to the central adagietto to the orchestra's maximum deployment, here against the background of a wind machine. In the second section, led by the oboe, the woodwinds abound with jazz accents. I kind of beg to differ at that point, but we'll get to that. We hear a muscular chorale from the brass during the work's final minutes. I often wonder, by this point, Europeans know jazz pretty well, but I'm kind of wondering what they mean by it in the classical tradition, because there is a different tradition of what jazz was. It usually was a part of popular music in the early 20th century, and sometimes it's kind of a deconstructed form of it or something. Anyway, let's hear this piece. It starts atmospherically with a rumbling that crescendos into an icy percussion outburst. The bass drum sound here is very satisfying, rumbling out of the subwoofer with no real sense of position, just sounding like it's everywhere. It's an excellent recording. There's lots of percussion detail in the opening, most of it metallic. By the 3rd minute, there's a floating cloud of amorphous sound. Strings emerge out of that with a section to themselves, and heavily rumbling bass drum. We hear the different groups of the orchestra come out for a section, sort of like a concerto for orchestra. Though the rhythm doesn't drive this piece, there are numerous changes of rhythm. They just come across as merely one more gesture in the entire soundscape. I'm going to sample this from about 5 minutes and 30 seconds into the piece to give you an idea of what it sounds like once it gets going. Now, I'm giving us pretty long samples here because I want to get this in our ear, and I think we just sort of can't really absorb it right away. It takes time. So we got there some of the changing timbral combinations of the work. It's kind of overwhelming and beautifully captured on the recording. The subwoofer gets a real workout in this piece with the constant rumbling of timpani and bass drum. By the 7-minute and 40-second mark, a decrescendo has been completed, and we move to a new section featuring winds over a bed of shimmering strings. It's really hard to pick specific spots to sample as the timbral combinations and rhythms keep changing. Let's get some of the staccato reeds with longer breathed strings and rumbling percussion underneath at around the 11-minute and 15-second mark. I know there's a lot going on there, and it's hard to pull out. But let me just give you a sort of an example. What Montalbetti is doing here to give this piece like a kind of coherence is you heard woodwinds at first, and then that just sort of melded with the brass, and the brass took over momentarily. You heard them down low, and then they sort of took over everything. And then the percussion came in and sort of gently pushed the brass aside, and everything just kept playing, of course, but different sections of the orchestra got the spotlight there. You might want to keep that in mind as you listen to the entire piece. Anyway, there's a pretty fantastic fanfare-like episode from the brass at the 12-minute and 30-second mark. Let's hear that. This just sort of caught my ear, so I wanted to sample it. I don't know, would you call that a fanfare? Does that sound like a fanfare to you? I don't know what else to call it, so I called it that. I did like the harmonies, but, first we had that brass timbre, and it's just all those sort of odd harmonies and, intervals in there. I just thought it was really kind of cool. Anyway, the brass have center stage from this point until the end of the piece. This hard-hitting work ends with an unexpected and rather cheeky pizzicato chord from the strings that seems of a completely different character than the entirety of what we heard up to now. It's a pretty interesting ending. Track 3, the final track, and the longest track at about 30 minutes, Éclair physionomique, Fantaisie symphonique après Paul Klee, completed in 2018. This is performed by the Orchestre Philharmonique de Monte-Carlo, conducted by Kazuki Yamada. This features Liza Karob on the violin solo, and the work features 3 percussionists and a timpani player. The piece is based on Paul Klee's painting Physico-Nomischer Blitz of 1927, and I put it up on our Facebook page if you want to have a look at what the painting looks like. You could also do a search for it on the internet. It's up there. Montalbetti's aim is to distill from the painting a formal idea, the percussion of the circle, and the brilliant luminosity of the streak of lightning zigzagging through it. Montalbetti says he saw the painting's elements as an allegory of friendship. When I saw the painting, I didn't think of that, but let's see. And was curious to explore how the painting's 2 components, characters and persons, might live alongside each other to their mutual benefit. So Montalbetti seems like a pretty positive-minded person, if he's seeing the painting that way. To me, it looked a little disturbing, actually, I have to say. The work has 2 key figures, a circle and an arrow, generating 2 sound spaces that cohabit and intermingle, 2 gestures that act independently and also infect each other. Okay, so you want to think about that. You have these 2 things, they're separate, and sometimes they come in and one takes over the other and inspires the other, and the other starts doing things that the other one was doing, that sort of thing. The orchestra is treated in instrumental families, with the woodwinds marked avec swing, skyscraper chords from the brass, as in Varese, and the keyboards with the Dionysian fervor, as in the piano cadenza. This is probably the most abstract work on the album, and if you thought the other 2 works were abstract, wait till you hear this. I can't explain the constantly shifting relationship between sections of the orchestra at each moment in the piece. It's long, and these things sort of occur over time, so I can't really just sample that. You really have to have a longish attention span to really follow that. It's sort of like watching the stars move in the sky night by night. You have to kind of have a good memory of what went before. It's a very big piece, but I'll try to give you an idea of what's happening through the sound samples. This is a big, complex work that will reward repeated listens. As with the first 2 pieces, this one starts atmospherically with orchestral timbres creating the unique atmosphere. Percussion features heavily again. The work remains in the piano pianissimo range for the opening, sounding mysterious and without form. The time span of ideas is pretty long. We hear some of Montalbetti's invented modes and scales in quick lines. The percussion plays a role from 3 minutes and 30 seconds. I'm getting a sense of the percussion and the strings inhabiting two worlds and playing two unrelated sets of material. See if you can pick this up in this louder section of the work. Man, it sounds like that microphone is just inches away from the bass drum's skin, the way that registers with that live sound. After the 7th minute, we hear the first wind machine play alongside other long sustained sounds with some quick phrases punctuating the space. Again, the recording is fantastic, the fortissimi providing impact. The percussion registers strongly, but sound of a piece with the rest of the orchestra. In the 11th minute, we hear something like a guiding rhythm for the material. The orchestra is still separate in its material, but the material commingles here. Let's hear this from 11 minutes and 30 seconds. Man, that was such an interesting sudden rhythm change at the end there, too. Now, what you want to notice there is you're hearing the woodwinds only, and they're all playing staccato, and they have like a really specific sort of rhythmic sound to them. So the winds play there in a rhythmic pattern that has sudden swerves into new rhythmic patterns, and we heard one of those at the end. The rhythm is something beyond the timbre to hold on to. I rather like the section just past the 13th minute where wind patterns in different rhythms are blending. Let's hear a little bit of that. This section is very subtle. It sounds very stable, but those rhythms overlapping rhythms is pretty interesting if you can kind of listen into that. This morphs into other combined rhythmic patterns, but the general idea and the dynamic continue for some time. The brass start making themselves felt around the 18th minute. By this point, I'm noticing how Montalbetti uses the different sections of the orchestra because he did something similar in the previous piece. holding the brass's statements until late in the piece. He gives different sections of the orchestra the spotlight in the same order as far as I can tell, and that gives the musical ideas something of a force of nature sense. The sections of the orchestra become dominant in the same way the seasons pass in the same order every year. The use of different sections of the orchestra dominating certain sections of this piece make the work more followable on a second listen. You're already expecting something. At the 23-minute and 20-second mark, percussion and brass are playing together, the percussion having a silvery, metallic sound. The wild-sounding piano cadenza occurs in the 25th minute, accompanied by percussion and sustained brass chords. At 28 minutes, woodwinds emerge in the center with the piano still playing Montalbetti's mode scales. The dynamic quietens for the end, and there are distant percussive rumblings from the bass drum for about 30 seconds until the track is finally over. And there it is, we made it. If you're somebody that likes the intellectual side of music, there's lots to dig into here. But if you don't want to think about it much, as is so often the case in French music, the timbral combinations will give you something to hold on to. Orchestral detail is sort of overwhelming, featuring timbre, mode scales, and rhythm, all constantly shifting like clouds on a windy day. And though the recording captures it well, it's so much that I feel these works would have benefited from a surround sound recording, as those add a lot of space. No worries though, we hear the richness of the orchestral timbres exceptionally well here, especially in the powerfully captured second track, Ouverture Philharmonique. The music really is hard to describe. The composer is probably right to claim that the music approaches the mystery of our lives via experiencing the music rather than putting the mystery into words. I wouldn't say I loved this, but I was pretty intrigued by the sound of it all. It's inviting repeat listens for me.
You're definitely entering a new sound world of Montalbetti in this recording. You can sense his language of mode scales that he explains through the changing harmonic landscapes, but it would probably take a lot of time to understand everything he's developed in this system. For me, mostly enjoying this recording was about the ever-changing timbre combinations of the full orchestra, and I mean everything. He uses all of the instruments in the orchestra in
he sure does.
unpredictable ways. I think the way to listen to these compositions is to set aside your traditional expectations and just immerse yourself in the sounds as they come. I felt like I was observing some, as you said, passing clouds or changing scenery, and it was better just to not have any preconceived notions. Some patterns emerge, like you say, in the types of instrumental sounds that you'll hear in orders, but the combinations of tones and then the use of percussion as well was always really surprising. It's interesting and unique, and yeah, it's quite an experience.
You said you should put aside preconceptions. A good way to do this is just imagine you've just landed on another planet and you really have no idea what you're going to see there. That's sort of what listening to this music is like. It's really unique,
yes,
but it is complicated. And again, repeated listenings are probably necessary.
Yeah. Be interesting to listen to some more of his compositions in the future. Okay, on the jazz side of the program, I happen to pick 3 recordings that all came out January 10th that stood out. And the kind of common theme that emerged is young adventurers. The leaders of these groups, I believe, are all under 30 and have achieved quite a bit in their short lives so far. And it's also quite international in scope. And we're going to start out with a piano trio of Israeli musicians, although I'm pretty sure they're mostly based in New York now. And that's the GTO trio. And the GTO comes from the first initials of their first names. The recording is called Within. It's on Anzik Records. And this is their second recording. Their debut recording comes from 2018. It was called From the Road. So who are these 3? The G. And forgive me as I go through all of this and my name pronunciation here. And we got Israeli names and some other titles that will be a little bit difficult maybe. The G is for Gadi Lahavi on piano, born in Tel Aviv in 1996. Lahavi played by ear from a very early age and experimented with improvisation, which brought him naturally to jazz. He was discovered by Ravi Coltrane, who invited him to play together at the Village Vanguard and Birdland. He's since played with names like Chick Corea, Dave Liebman, Bobby McFerrin, Phil Wilson, and Eddie Gomez. He's a graduate of the Romande School of Jazz and Contemporary Music. T is for Tal Mashiach on bass. He was born in Israel in 1993. He studied classical guitar from age 10, and then he began studying double bass at the age of 17. He received a full scholarship to the New School in New York. And O is for Ofri Nehemiah on drums. Born in 1994, Nehemiah is an Israeli drummer. He played with bassist Avishai Cohen when he was 19, and he came to New York in 2016 at the age of 22. The recording notes on Bandcamp don't say where this was recorded, but it was recorded by Simon Huber and Christian Kaufman, mixed by Brian Montgomery, and mastered by Nate Wood. All right, the recording is going to get underway with an original composition by the drummer Nehemiah called Like Water. This has an intriguing slow build-up, a piano chime, and a repeated high C note in the bass with lightly dancing cymbals makes an intro at an unhurried 4-beat tempo. The piano melody starts sparse, stop-and-go-like with interesting bass movement underneath. Let's hear this recording get started. Things get more animated, and the momentum gathers like a tide of water. After it reaches a climax, it comes down softly for some exchanges between Mashiach's bass and Lahavi. Let's jump back in to hear some of that. Builds it up to a final climax, and it comes down softly with an outro of the one-note bass idea. I like the flowing energy and Nehemiah's hard-hitting drum accents. Track 2 is called One for G, and this is also a Nehemiah original composition. Speaking of drum accents, this has a moderate, even 6-beat feel with a hit on the 4th beat that stands out. The initial melody section seems to be 28 measures with a little opening figure that comes back again. I like Lahavi's unhurried and sparse exposition, giving time for things to build up. Let's take a listen to this one. uses the melodic figures to launch into more improvised ideas on the next round, getting into some ringing notes and a more delicate section before it resets for a final shorter melody section. Let's hear some of that as well. And back to the by now familiar melody theme. Track 3 is an original composition by Mashiach, Merengue Mediterraneo. This is cute and rhythmically tricky. Piano starts it out and then bass takes over before a new bass and left-hand piano line comes in. It sounds like it's in a 5/8 meter, a 1-2-3-1-2 kind of feel. Lahavi gets some joyful sounding improvisations that go from rhythmic to fast running lines. It comes down into a new soft rhythmic piano section with cymbal decoration. When Mashiach's bass comes in, Nehemiah is about to let the drumsticks fly. It sounds like a flurry of automatic weapon fire, and we have to check a little bit of that out as well. It goes back to the cute melody there for a light ending section. Track 4, also a Mashiach original composition, and I don't know how this is supposed to be read. It's capital V and little v, and Zacco. A longing minor theme started solo on piano. There's a descending bass pattern to follow. The first 8-measure section repeats. Bass and drums join in on a contrasting section that turns a bit more hopeful. After the 32-measure melody, Mashiach takes over for a go on bass. Let's hear the beginning. Lahavi comes back and works it to an emotional climax with bowed bass underneath to thicken it up, and it comes to a quiet ending over ringing bass notes. Track 5, a Nehemiah original composition, A Bull's Market. It's time for some modal fun and tricky rhythms. It sounds like this is in 7/4, but there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a catchy piano riff and answering syncopated bass and left-hand piano phrases while Nehemiah mixes things up. On this tune, Lahavi's improvisations navigate the tricky rhythmic landscape. It bursts into a swing over walking bass, and it sounds like alternating measures of 7 and 6 beats. The tension is really exciting, so let's jump back in to check out a little bit of that. After that, bass and piano mark things out with chords for Nehemiah to get some work around the drum kit before they get back to the original melody idea with lots of final chiming ideas from Lahavi. Track 6, Kachi, a Masiak composition, a rubato and forlorn solo piano opening from Lahavi. It gets into a tempo but then slows to a pause before a new rhythmic piano idea sets up Masiak to come in on a unison melody with the piano. We'll jump in from that point just a little bit before a minute into the tune. It goes around there again, and there's a contrasting section that sort of inspires a dancing feeling. On this tune, let's check out Masiak's bass solo. Nice rhythmic drive in that bass solo, and Lahavi's off improvising from there. His lines are rapid but smoothly connected. It comes down to a new, softly rhythmic piano section, and then a section like the opening with bowed bass and cymbals this time, and a quiet ending. Track 7 is sort of the climax of the recording in terms of excitement. No Vowels Allowed, an original by Lahavi. Start and stop teasing get this one going with great interplay. Let's check it out. Well, there are tempo change-ups from insanely fast to a more settled groove and back again. Along the way, someone has to just shout it out, so let's hear some of that fun and into Nehemiah's drumming. Sounds like a lot of fun. A final, more continuous melody section finishes it up. Track 8, another Lahavi original composition. A moment before, a solo piano start. At first, the phrases have a rubato, lilting 6/8 feel, and then a more pressing 4/4 feel before switching back. Bass and drums are in quietly, setting a gentle tempo. There's a short piano melody section. On this one, let's sample Masiak's great melodic playing and tone a little bit into the tune. Lahavi builds it up from there with ringing chords. The final section returns to the rubato intro idea, but with a little dancing line together with bass. And the recording ends up with track 9, A Man Within Himself, which in Hebrew, not that my pronunciation will be very close, is Adam Betoch Atzmo. This is a live recording. This tune is by the Israeli rock singer and composer Shalom Hanach, and it's the title track from his first Hebrew solo album in 1977. I actually found the original on Deezer by searching in Hebrew because there's no English titles on it. And so I'd like to play that for you so you'll know where this comes from. Take a listen to this.
לפעמים עצוב אומר הוא, לפעמים הוא שר, לפעמים פותח דלת לקבל מכר, אבל לרוב אדם בתוך עצמו נסגר.
Yeah, kind of catchy. Something I've never heard before. I don't imagine it get a lot of play outside of Hebrew-speaking communities. Anyway, here, Mashiach takes that opening guitar riff idea and adapts it to his bass, and Lahavi is in on the gentle melody. It's all cute and catchy. Let's take a listen to this version of it. Lahavi keeps it simple and respectfully close to the original melody. It's a live recording, and you can hear some vocalizing around the main riff there that becomes quite a hook as they vamp out on with some decorations from Lahavi between phrases to the end. It's a sweet ending to a recording that I really enjoyed. These guys have great synergy and communication, most impressively demonstrated in the thrilling No Vowels Allowed. They can take a loose approach that all hangs together, as in the opening Like Water track, or deal with tricky meters and complex lines like in Abutbul's Market. The original tune melodies are catchy and become familiar quickly. There's a variety of grooves, hard swinging, tight straight beats, and a dash of Middle Eastern modes for some spice in the recipe. Individually, their talents come through with a mix of percussive excitement and smooth rapid lines in Lahavi's improvisations, bold bass tone and melodic solo ideas from Mashiach, and real drum artillery when it's needed from Nehemiah. A very exciting trio recording.
Yeah, you singled out two of the tracks that I singled out as well. It's kind of funny. This album struck me for its interesting tempo and rhythm choices and ways of articulating that too. There are a lot of rhythm changes on the tracks, very few of which are swing. I think you hear a swing rhythm for the first time on Butbul's Market. So that struck me. That's kind of what, track 5. It's pretty deep into the album. The album walks a line between classical and jazz. Vivi and Zacco felt classical to me, and Merengue Mediterraneo had a bit of a Spanish dance quality that you hear in Spanish classical piano pieces. I was thinking Granados and Falla, maybe Albanese and things like that. Perhaps the oddest track was No Vowels Allowed, in which the rhythm and feel are constantly changing, sometimes from phrase to phrase. It was pretty impressive. Gadi Lahavi's piano technique is pretty impressive. He had me surprised at the rapidity of some of his repeated notes at times, and he had these really smooth, pearly, and very fast scales and arpeggios as well. So the classical references are probably not unfounded. It's an album with a lot of variety, whose appealing themes set us up for the rhythmic surprises.
Yeah. All right, next let's jump to the UK for a young sax player who's making a name for himself, Cercle, on A Modern Genius Volume 1. It's on Stony Lane Records, also came out January 10th. From Birmingham, England, Cercle won the BBC Young Jazz Musician of the Year prize in 2018. I think he's around 28 or 29 now. He released his debut recording as a leader in 2021, Know Them, Know Us, and then Ibeji in 2022. And his new third recording here celebrates the genius of Thelonious Monk, who he says he connected to through the playing of saxophone colossus Sonny Rollins. The lineup includes Cercle on tenor sax, Steve Saunders guitar, Josh Vadivelou on bass, Nathan England Jones on drums. We've got a couple guests on the recording. Liberty Styles, the tap dancer, on some tracks.
Yeah, we have a tap dancer on this audio-only album.
Tap dancing is something that we don't really hear much of these days, but interesting, it's another original American art form that developed along with jazz out of a mixture of Irish dance, footwork, and African rhythms. And so it's kind of interesting to have it on a jazz recording. We've also got one vocal track with Heidi Vogel. More on that later. This was recorded live in Birmingham on the 17th of March in 2023 at 1000 Trades, mixed and mastered by Ollie Sansom. Recording starts out with Trinkle Tinkle, a Monk tune from 1952. You can find this on 1954's Thelonious Monk Trio and also 1961's Thelonious Monk with John Coltrane. Cole starts right out with Monk's flurry of notes from the original, and we get our first taste of Styles' tap dancing. Things get swinging, and although we've got Saunders' guitar instead of piano, it really makes a monkish mood. Cole works up an extended solo with a lot of ideas. Let's check out how he ends it up. Saunders solos next, with a lot of adventurous lines and humor. Vadivelou trades off some bass with Jones's drums and Styles' footwork too, before a final run through Monk's jagged melody. Track 2 is Rhythmaning, first recorded on 1957's Mulligan Meets Monk on Riverside, Jerry Mulligan that is. A rhythm changes tune. Cole starts this out with solo improvisations that get some added backing as the other members gradually join in. All right, we're coming up to the melody idea right here, and that will get into some deconstruction soon as well. Let's check that out. They get back to the melody a bit before Varduhi takes the lead, mostly walking it out on the bass with Styles' footwork. You start to feel that you're missing out on the visual aspect of the live performance as the crowd cheers out. Cole takes a rhythmically snappy, swinging solo with playful articulation. They break up the driving swing for a bit with more free section before getting back in the groove with some of the melody and have some more fun with a slower tempo into a little more cacophony. Then it's time for some tap and drum exchanges. Let's check out a little bit of that. Cole joins in more and more, building it up to a final melody section and some riffing to end it. It's 11.5 minutes, capturing the energy and freedom of the live performance. Next are a couple of medley tracks. Track 3 is a combination of Misterioso and Straight No Chaser. Misterioso is the title track from the Thelonious Monk Quartet's 1958 recording, and Straight No Chaser first appears on 1952's Thelonious Monk Genius of Modern Music Volume 2. These are both blues-based compositions, so they make a good pairing. Misterioso has an interesting melody of interval pairs, but here Varduhi starts it out solo on the bass with ringing double stops and bends into a lot of ideas for almost 2 minutes. This track approaches 16 minutes in total. I'll jump in from where he brings in the melody interval idea that prompts the others to join in on a slow rendition of the theme. Jones works around the toms under the melody. You hear him getting going there, and they keep going around and letting him work up the energy. It comes to a hold and gets going again for Cole to take a relaxed solo. Then the tempo changes up midway, where I think they're going into the Straight No Chaser idea. back to a slow tempo for a guitar solo from Saunders to get going. Let's hear some of his playing on this one. For a little bit of raunchy rockiness in there. He works up to a climax of chord playing and calls back with some of the Misterioso melody that transforms into a variation on Straight Note Chaser to end it. Track 4 is a combination of Crisscross from 1952's Milt Jackson with the Thelonious Monk Quintet on Blue Note and Round Midnight and Brilliant Corners. Of course, Brilliant Corners comes from the album of the same title with Sonny Rollins, released in 1957. A cool bass and drum intro into nice interplay by Cole and Saunders on the Crisscross melody. Let's hear it get going. Calls off on a solo exposition from there that has some tap dance backing from Styles, and then works into the Round Midnight melody. I'll jump in from that point. He continues on, outlining the tune and improvising skillfully for 5 minutes, finally connecting it to the Brilliant Corners melody where the others join in to wrap it up. Track 5 is Let's Cool One. This is from 1952's Thelonious Monk Genius of Modern Jazz, Volume 2. It also shows up on Misterioso. Saunders gets this started solo on guitar. I'll jump in a little ways in when he sets a relaxed tempo to bring the others in. As they work through the melody, they speed it up and then pull it back for a bass solo from Varduhi. Let's hear some of his playing on this tune. Very clean and gentle bass playing, and it's just the start of a long solo that gets a nice crowd reaction at the end with a little sped up phrase. Cole follows with a long playful solo that continues on and connects to the final melody section where they have some fun playing with the tempo. Track 6 is Bright Mississippi. This first appears on Monk's Dream from 1962 on Columbia Records. If you know Monk's original, it starts out with rhythmic blocky chords, but here Styles gets to start it out with some solo footwork. I'll jump in about a minute in where she sets the rhythm that shapes the melody that will bring Cole in. Well, the others join in, and Cole continues on with improvisations. Let's jump back in to hear the climax of that. Section and Styles get some extended trading fun before Cole's back for a final melody section. And the recording is going to end up with a Duke Ellington composition, Come Sunday, which he first recorded in 1946. In the recording notes, Cole is quoted as saying, "Ellington has such a strong musical resonance with Monk." Heidi Vogel joins in to add vocals on this tune. It's a sparse setting with ringing bass to get it started.
Oh Lord, dear Lord. God Almighty, Lord of love, please look down and see my people through.
Let's come back in for a little more of the vocals when it gets into tempo a bit more.
Sun and moon up in the sky. When the sky is gray, I know it's just clouds passing by. And He give peace and comfort to every trouble of mine. Come Sunday, oh, come Sunday, that's the day.
Cole is off on improvisations there, with Styles tapping away underneath, and Vogel returns with some band backing for vocals to finish the tune in fine fashion. There's an hour and 15 minutes of music with just 7 tracks here. It's a live recording with extended solos all around, so think of these samples I've played as just teasers to the full performance. It's mostly Monk's music, but not in a retro kind of way. Cole and company have reimagined and transformed the compositions freely into something new, but if you know the tunes, there's enough for your ears to find familiar. Cole's playing is rooted in the sounds of Sonny Rollins and early John Coltrane, with enough modern infusion to play extended solos of continuous ideas very creatively. He shares the solo spotlight generously with the sidemen here, everyone getting long improvised expositions. Saunders' guitar solos are particularly adventurous and playful. You miss the visual aspect of Liberty Styles' tap dancing just listening to this, and I'm not sure it works everywhere in the recording for me, but it certainly is a unique addition. I'll be interested to see what direction Zosa Cole goes in next.
Yeah, the tap dancing sort of intrigued me. I was kind of wondering how would that fit in with Monk's music visually. I'm just kind of wondering what it looked like listening to this. It's kind of interesting. The tap dancing rhythm is off on the right channel, yeah. And if you didn't know what it was, you'd just think it was somebody like, kind of drumming on a guitar case or something. It kind of comes across that way. The recording itself is very upfront, and that includes the tap dancing. Everything's very present, with the bass and drums having an in-the-room presence. It's a very dry recording, which suits the playing here. There's a lot of space, and it all picks up really well. You can hear the tone very clearly. I was interested in the rhythmic interpretations of Monk's themes. They suggest a lot of stops and starts, and those are really drawn out in these performances, including some controlled breakdowns of ensemble, which seem to fit the themes well. See, he's actually pulled out and deconstructed a little bit of Monk's already sort of odd, sort of quirky rhythms, and lines. Cole plays with impressive virtuosity and has interesting ideas on how to manipulate the themes throughout the album, from adding virtuosic ornamentation to stretching, compressing, and interrupting rhythm. He's consistently interesting and made me hear these familiar themes in new ways. Sort of had me thinking, oh, that's in there. I didn't really notice that. The album is sort of a cubist version of Monk's compositions in a lot of ways, although they're very identifiable. And Monk's compositions themselves are already a bit of a cubist version of traditional jazz up to that point. This is a longish album, but I heard it straight through and didn't even notice the time pass. I just like the compositions that much, and I'm a big fan of extended solos. I really want to hear where and how long like a soloist can keep something interesting. I would have liked to have been at this live performance, actually. I probably would have enjoyed it.
Nicely captured here, and interesting to hear Monk's music reinterpreted.
Always, yeah.
And our final recording, another young leader, Javier Rojo, with Música para amansar fieros, which I believe translates to Music to Tame Wild Beasts or something like that. It's on the Fresh Sound New Talent label.
Wow, that's pretty much that's a bold title.
Also came out January 10th. Born in Guadalajara, Spain in 1999, Javier Rojo now lives in Basel, Switzerland, He studied for 5 years in Barcelona, and he's played at international festivals with some big jazz names. Currently, he's finishing his Master in Performance at the Jazz Campus in Basel with mentors such as Mark Turner, Brad Meldau, Jorge Rossi, Jeff Bayard, and Ambrose Akimusire. So some big names to learn from there. And this is his debut recording. Javier Rojo on tenor sax, all original compositions. Alvaro Ocon on trumpet, Noé Secura on piano, Elliot Nuetz on electric guitar, Joan Codina on bass, Genius Wesley on drums. I believe he's from California.
His mom and dad must have been really impressed by him to give him the name of Genius.
And a special guest on the flute on one track, Fernando Brox, who we've heard on the podcast before. Back in episode 165, Driven Crazy from May of last year, we heard his recording From Within, also on Fresh Sound, New Talent. A really great flute player. We enjoyed that recording a lot. This was recorded at Jazz Campus, Basel, Switzerland in the summer of 2024, mixed and mastered by Daniel Somaru, produced by Javier Sanchez Rojo, I guess that's his full name, and executive producer Jordi Pujol. And the recording is going to get underway with a tune called Black, White, and Colors. Things take off right away from the opening number. There's a 16-measure intro section of whole note chords with trumpet, sax, and guitar, sometimes producing strong tension. The melody develops in fits and starts with big jumps, returning to the whole note idea. The bass and piano chord movement underneath is tricky. We can get some of all those things in a 1-minute sample, so let's check it out. Back to that idea there. Ocon is up for the first solo on trumpet. I like the sense of space between his phrases. Nuetz follows on guitar with waves of lines, but let's jump back in for Rojo's solo a little bit later. Yeah, nice intensity and flowing lines in his solo. It's back to a final melody arrangement section there with some surprises and excitement from Wesley's hard-hitting drums. Track 2 is called Late April. This is a short tune, dreamy and a little delirious. Rising and falling piano lines get sprinkled with some unexpected dissonance before the horns are in with soft legato lines. That's about half of the tune right there, and Ocon has a little neat pitch-bent trumpet cry before it ends quietly. Track 3 is Lonely Night. This starts with a 16-measure intro where Nuets and Codina have neat guitar and bass figures that set the mood and groove. Trumpet and sax are in on the melody lines. There's a repeating 20-measure section with a riffy phrase ending, and then a final 8-measure section. After the melody, Secula is off on a piano solo that really flows freely over rumbling bass figures from Codina and hard hits between dancing cymbals from Wesley. There's a lot of energetic interplay here, so let's jump back in and check a bit of it out. Rhorer is next from there with the solo. His tone is placid and the rhythm section comes down in intensity to match his mood, and they gradually work it up together, increasing the energy. Ocon joins in for some backing before they get back to the melody lines together, and they vamp out for a while Wesley works the drums up furiously to the end. Track 4 is Riba. Wesley gets this started with an interesting 6-beat rhythm. Piano and bass join in with interesting rhythmic figures as well. Let's jump in where the horns enter, and they're joined by Brox's flute on a flowing melody for this tune. The melody continues to evolve there to those final rising lines. Ocon has a nimble trumpet solo with good melodic ideas. Let's check out Brox's playing on this one. Very fine flute playing there. Brox and Ocon have flowing melody lines together, while Rojo has improvisations of speedy lines as it pushes to the end with some final flute flurries. Track 5, Klemerunas. It's a ballad in 3/4 time. A simple and light piano intro gets it started. Rojo enters on the somber-sounding first section of the melody. It lifts and becomes more hopeful with Ocon joining in. It moves into a final harmonized horn line section before Codina emerges with a sturdy toned bass solo with interesting ideas. Let's check out some of his playing. Rojo has a subtle solo on this one as well, with a lot of variety and tonal expression, working back into the final melody section again with Ocon lifting the mood. Track 6, Coefusión Monstruosa. This has a tricky and unpredictable syncopated horn melody. It sounds like it's 27 measures that then repeats into a section of some tricky synced bass and left-hand piano figures before the horn melody returns once more. After the final horn melody section, Yates has a guitar solo, so let's check out a little bit of his playing. Rojo and Secula have solos here too, and then the bass and left-hand piano section we heard before takes it to a final horn melody section with some improvisations from Ocon before the end. Track 7, Platanos, Aguacates y Naranjas, Bananas, Avocados, and Oranges. Wesley gets a 6-beat rhythm going that gets a bass ostinato. The horn melody is dangerous and dissonant with a rhythmic change-up to 4 beats. Rojo launches into a solo that gets the same rhythmic switch-ups underneath. I'll let it play a little bit long so you can catch all of that happening. Secula follows with an animated piano solo. The horns are back with the second part of the dangerous melody to a suspenseful ending. Track 8 is the title track, Música para Amansar Fieras. Soft rising lines of piano notes make an introduction for Rojo to enter with a delicate melody that gets joined by clearly articulated guitar notes. I'll start a sample on this one from Rojo's entrance a little bit into the tune. It swells up with a heavier beat when Ocon's trumpet enters, reaching a climax and then comes back down softly. It's a short piece at less than 3.5 minutes, and it's composed to the end without solos. Track 9 is Yolanda, a fast 6/8 rhythm and hypnotically alternating chords with some interesting variations set the mood here on an 8-measure introduction. There's a 16-measure horn melody, and then Ocon is off on some improvisations. I've been meaning to get a sample of his trumpet playing in, so I'll let it play a little bit here to hear some of his agility. takes over there, and the two horns continue to trade phrases before getting some simultaneous improvisations and a synced-up line together. A new loping ostinato bass feel forms for a guitar solo from duets. There's a new tricky line for guitar and horns to work together with more groove change-ups, and Wesley gets to turn on the thunder with some vamping at the end of the tune before it fades out. So let's check that out. And track 10 is an alternate take. It says take 2 of Lonely Night that we heard before. They take the same overall approach in tempo and style here, but there's a lot of spontaneity and interaction differences among the rhythm section behind the solos, which are of course unique as well, so you can enjoy comparing the differences in the two tracks. So, wow, an adventurous debut recording. Rojo's compositions are harmonically complex with a lot of variety in rhythmic feels and moods. They have an airy freshness that lends to spontaneity, which the rhythm section flows freely with. Rojo's sax playing is energetic with an appealing tone that also has a fleet lightness to it. Ocon is a good match as a horn partner here on trumpet with melodically developed solos showing a lot of agility. Secula and Nott stretch out in their solos too, and Wesley's drumming catches your ear with delicate cymbal work and real thunder too. It's a challenging and expansive recording.
Yeah, challenging? I don't know. I thought it was very expansive, certainly. I liked the creaminess of Rojo's tone on sax. The entire band plays with a lot of class. A word I use a lot on these tracks is understated. The solos all make themselves felt in a well-dressed, formal way. Even on tracks like Lonely Night, where the harmony starts getting into atonal additions in the solos, I guess that would be challenging. The playing doesn't burst out of its classy boundaries, though it does poke at the edges. The focus, of course, is on Rojo and Alvaro Ocon on trumpet, with Rojo delivering the creamy tone and Ocon equally classy with his more focused tone. Elliot Nuett's electric guitar was clean-toned and full throughout, and drummer genius Wesley brought some hard-hitting excitement during his solos, and is highly alert to what's happening in the solos, responding often to what he hears. I really liked listening to him. And I liked Juan Codina's thumping bass solos and his often creative bass lines under the themes. So there's a lot of complexity going on if you listen, during the solos and during the themes, like to what's going on underneath in the rhythm. It's pretty interesting. Noah Secula provided a lot of class in the piano too. This is an album that pokes at the boundaries it sets up, giving a bit of a challenge. I guess I did think it was challenging. Okay. It gave a bit of a challenge, but remaining eminently listenable and enjoyable throughout.
Yeah, I suppose I became aware of the challenge of the sort of compositional structures, trying to figure them out, because they're not standard at all. There's some interesting phrase lengths and things happening and new things still coming on later in the tune that you haven't heard before. So it kept me on my toes the whole time trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, there were classical elements on this, but I felt like it was very, also in a classical and really kind of jazz club style, it was very like well dressed, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't really let its hair down much. And, I think that kind of kept it very listenable throughout.
Interesting recording. All right, that's going to wrap it up for episode 197 of Adult Music. And we've already got things lined up for next week, episode 198. What's on the classical menu, Mike?
All right, well, I mentioned last week that one of the anniversaries that we have this year is the 500th anniversary of the birth of Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina. I think that's right, 500 years, but it's an anniversary of his anyway. And so we're going to hear the first of 2 new recordings that feature his music. There's another one that I'll kind of do in a few weeks after. Then we have a new recording of the fantastic Debussy sonatas for different instruments, the chamber works that he wrote at the end of his life, performed by the Nash Ensemble, who are just always fantastic. I have really a lot of their recordings from over the years. And then finally, the contemporary nominee this week is called Baltic Prayer, and it features a lot of contemporary sort of Baltic composers and some who have recently died as well. And some who are not Baltic at all, but have a similar style. So those are our 3 classical recordings for next week.
In jazz, now this will be the 3rd week in a row of the new year. I've got all new recordings. So the first episode had all January 3rd, and then this week all January 10th, and next week will be all January 17th.
Yeah, I don't have that next week, but I do have January 10th,
right.
From January 10th on. So
I found 3 winners from this Friday, just 2 days ago, and they're all trumpet recordings. We're going to start out with Thomas Marriott's Screen Time, featuring some movie themes, including You Only Live Twice, the old James Bond theme. So it was great to hear that as a jazz version.
Sung by Nancy Sinatra originally.
And that's on Imani Records with Orrin Evans on the keyboards there. And then we're going to go to Origin for an interesting and exciting album I've been listening to on my headphones as I was traveling around since Friday. That's the Brad Good Polytonal Big Band with the Snake Charmer. And Brad Good's a trumpet player that we really like. I remember his classy playing on Ted Piltzeker's recording from last year.
It's an album I still listen to quite a bit.
And you're going to like this one. And then we're going to have a challenge over on Wide Hive Records with trumpeter Eric Jacobson's new Breakthrough recording. We heard his writing and arranging before. He's kind of influenced by classical minimalism, and he's got a lot of different instruments and strings on here as well. So we've got all that to look forward to for next week. Any final comments before we say goodnight, Mike?
Well, nothing special this week. It's been a pretty busy opening month of the year, and promises to continue being so next week. So I guess I'm going to keep busy.
All right. Thanks, as always, to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo, and we'll be back again next week. If you want to get started listening to those albums early along with us, a few hours after this episode is published, you'll find a playlist on Deezer and a link to it from our Facebook page. So until next week, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.